When was the last time you grabbed your catechism to answer a question about the faith? We can't just make up answers or take someone else's word for it all the time. We'll talk about that tonight, so please stay with us. Welcome. Thank you. I'm Father Mitch, and welcome to EWTN Live, our chance to bring you guests from all over the world. Before we get to our guest, I want to mention that today is the feast of Saint Cristobal Magallanes Jara. Saint Cristobal was a priest born in 1869, shepherd, very simple family, but he went to the seminary, and he was a priest during a time of great turmoil in the church in Mexico. The government had been taken over by very secular forces that were also motivated by the Masonic Lodge. And as such, they tried to eradicate the church. And when people rose up against the government, there was the so-called Cristero War. Now, Saint Cristobal was very clear in preaching not to do violence. He said, don't do armed rebellion. But that didn't matter when he was arrested. He was on his way to celebrate the Holy Mass, and soldiers captured him without a trial. They executed him. But his dying words were to those soldiers, where he said, I die innocent, and ask God that my blood may serve to unite my Mexican brethren. He forgave his murderers and was then shot to death, as many, many other priests and lay people were in that terrible time in Mexico. Well, tonight we have a guest, a good friend of the network, a good friend of mine. He's been teaching from the Catechism of the Catholic Church for some time now on his EWTN television series called Grab Your Catechism. And he's here tonight to discuss how and why the Catechism came about. And in the age of instant information, we should still study it. So please welcome a good friend of mine, Father Charles Connor.
Father, thank you so much. Thank you.
So good to have you here.
Always an honor to be back here with you.
Oh, good.
Very,
and
very
I'm glad
good.
that you're doing this series. But, we have this catechism that we're using now, the Catechism of the Catholic Church, only since 1992, 3?
In the early 90s it was, yes.
And, because that was part of the celebration of the Year of Faith. So it must have been 93 when Pope Benedict wanted us to celebrate the Year of Faith to commemorate that 20th anniversary, as well as the 50th anniversary of the start of the Vatican Council. Sure. And we need to have a little bit of an understanding about catechesis and catechism. Why do we have such a book? Let's go back to some of the early church. They didn't have catechism books, but great bishops like Augustine and the Bishop of Cyril of Jerusalem, they did catechism. Tell us a little bit about that background.
It's an interesting thing, Father. First of all, if you come to our own time, the 21st century, and you look at the Catechism of the Catholic Church serving us today, you will find a very, very different format indeed from what we've traditionally been used to when we think of the word catechism. You think of the word catechism, usually you think of something in question and answer format to be memorized. Well, if you look at the Catechism of the Catholic Church, you're looking at all these literally thousands of paragraphs of particular statements, enfleshed with Scripture, with commentary from the fathers of the Church, writings of the saints, and so forth to back up the various doctrinal statements.
Yeah, you and I both grew up at a time when we had a question and an answer in the Baltimore Catechism.
Well, I certainly did. I thought you were far too young for that, however.
Yeah, right. You're the
No,
youngster here, remember that.
We did indeed. But the interesting point, I think, long before we get to the Baltimore Catechism, the interesting point is if you go back, if you trace it back to the early days of the Church, you'll find that apologetical tools were always in evidence, really, from the earliest days of Christianity. So, I mean, so the format we have today just seems to be what at least in the minds of many people, was needed for our time, for clarity, and to suit the needs of contemporary 20th and 21st century men and women. But I mean, you can go back, you can go back, for example, to the Didache. I mean, the Didache was apologetical teaching. What was it written, about 100 A.D. or so? Probably one of the earliest.
Maybe even a little earlier.
Maybe even earlier than that, yes. And, it was one of the earliest pieces of Christian literature that we have. And I was just trying to think this afternoon, it may have been Justin, but you can correct me on this. Who was the author, if you recall, who gave us one of the earliest expositions of the Christian liturgy, very similar to the Mass.
Yes,
was it Justin?
It was Justin.
It was Justin.
In Justin's Apology.
Justin's Apology, and it describes in detail for us the various parts of the what was usually called the Eucharist by the early Christians. So, I mean, you have all these explanatory tools. They have been with us from the beginning. St. Augustine, as you very properly mentioned, I mean, was an apologist par excellence, obviously. You can take it up right to the 13th century. Look at St. Thomas Aquinas with the Summa Theologica. I mean, it's not meant for your average youngster in school by any means.
But it was for the university students.
For the university students in Paris and Italy and these various places.
And even in his format, I think it's very important for people to understand that you organized it by questions. You start off with a question.
That's right.
And give all the objections
all
he
the
could
objections
possibly find.
Absolutely
and then
correct.
Answer each one.
And really, I mean, well, in the early days of the church, you can see that there was a very, very real need. First of all, because Christianity was so new, and secondly, because Christianity was trying to grow and prosper and flourish in a very, very pagan atmosphere, a very pagan culture of the Roman Empire. So it had to explain itself.
And one other element, too, is that as Christianity made that move outside of a Palestinian Jewish background, it confronted the Greek world. Now, St. Paul starts that in Athens in Acts of the Apostles, but the early fathers of the church, like St. Justin, wanted to deal with the questions that were raised by Greek philosophers and intellectuals.
That's right.
So Origen, many others.
Secular philosophy.
Responding
Origen was Tertullian would be another example. Tertullian got a bit off the track in later times, but I mean, no. So these men contributed tremendously to early Christianity's understanding of itself, and for that matter, to the secular culture's understanding of what Christianity was all about, what it was trying to do. Christians live in the midst of the world they're no different from, but nonetheless, here is what we believe, and it was expressed that way. So obviously, the times go on, and an interesting trend, it seems to me, in church history is the fact that many of these, well, for want of a better term, we'll call them catechisms or apologies for the faith, sprang up when there was a very, very real need for them.
Yes.
When the church had to be defended, when there had to be clarity of thought, when there had to be, a very, very unambiguous statement of what we believe and why we believe it. Usually that was in the face of, heresy of one sort or another, errors springing up. And I mean, the early church, I mean, my heavens, you have the Pelagians and you have the Arians, and I mean, the list goes on and on.
Right, and
even these prominent men and people that we talked about, the fathers of the church, the doctors of the church, their writings also constitute apologetical material for us.
And certainly when they came to councils,
Oh,
and they were dealing with some of the heresy. You have, Sabellianism saying that Jesus is the Father, Son, and Spirit.
That's
and
right.
then Arius going to the opposite. Jesus is not God at all. And the Council of Nicaea had to deal with that.
That's right.
With its
Chalcedon
and Constantinople.
Constantinople, absolutely.
They came up with statements of faith to say this is the clarity we need and want.
Right. So, we don't often think of it necessarily in these terms, but these were all, in their time, catechetical tools that people needed, And of course, it was left to the clergy of those particular eras of the church to take those doctrinal statements as they flowed from councils or the writings of the fathers, the early doctors and this sort of thing, and to bring them down to the level of the average person to understand them. So that was the whole process of catechetics. Now, when we come to, and I think one of the really one of the major periods of history of the church had to have been at the time of the Reformation, because you had these individual people coming to the forefront with their particular theologies. You'd wonder sometimes how well thought out the individual theologies were. I mean, they were the products usually of individual men. They were reasonably intelligent men, not super geniuses necessarily, but people who had a gripe with the church, people who had an axe to grind for one reason or other, or many axes to grind, and they came up with certain popular ideas, and they were very persuasive personalities, individuals, and they began taking people with them, and they began taking priests and bishops with them, and finally they began taking even nations with them. People go as they're told, and they just they follow the leader. They don't think things through themselves.
And one of the issues, certainly in the period leading up to the Reformation, especially between the time of the bubonic plague and the chaos inside the church with the Avignon papacy and all, a series of new philosophical approaches also rose up and influenced many of the reformers. That they rejected Thomas Aquinas.
Rejected him totally, yeah.
And they saw people like William of Ockham and others.
William of Ockham, yeah.
They wanted to philosophize from that and do theology from that view.
Roger Bacon would be another one.
Yes, exactly.
Roger Bacon would be a very, very good example of what you're talking about there, I think. But yes, that is for sure. Well, what happened? You had the Reformation sweeping through Europe in the 16th century, and the various reformers in the various countries, and as a result, I mean, you had to have the church literally coming to the forefront, if you will, and making a clear affirmation of what we believed and why we believed it, because the faith had been so decimated in so many of these places. So, for example, when you look at a publication, let's call it, that's what it was, such as the Catechism of the Council of Trent. Now, I mean, Father, the amazing thing to me is you can still walk into bookstores today and buy the Catechism of the Council of Trent. It's republished, with a pretty good amount of regularity, and it certainly reaffirmed well what we think about the priesthood, for example, the Mass as a sacrifice. These things that have been so watered down by various reformers, and I mean, they're just two things that come to mind. Rejected, sure. And you think of people like. The wonderful work of St. Charles Borromeo. That's another story. But then there was a great saint by the name of Robert Bellarmine who did so much on. Now, he was a Dominican, I think, wasn't he? Or was he a Franciscan?
Yes, I think you need to go back to school. He was a Jesuit.
I know. The Bellarmino nella città di Roma.
And even prior to him, you had St. Peter Canisius. Another doctor of the church, from the Society of Jesus.
From the Society of Jesus.
Who wrote the first Catholic catechism.
That's right. Yes.
He did that prior to Bellarmine.
Prior to Bellarmine, that's absolutely right. Yeah, and Borromeo, of course, was the he was the nephew of Pope Pius IV.
Yeah.
But it was Pope St. Pius V who really held up his departure for his Archdiocese of Milan so that he could stay in Rome and complete the work that was needed for the Counter-Reformation, including work on the Catechism. But, you know, every time I think of those times, and I think of what Charles Borromeo faced when he went to Milan, I think of a statement that Fulton Sheen made. He said, he was talking about the 16th century, he said there was nothing wrong with the way we were thinking. There was a great deal wrong with the way we were living. Mm-hmm. And of course, the way we were living then had its what spilled over from the way we were living, obviously, and the laxity that had entered into the church was this poor theology that the reformers were able to get away with in the 16th century. But in any event, I mean, you know, you have a man like Borromeo going to Milan and literally weeping over the city of Milan. The situation was so bad. Priests were terribly, terribly ill-formed. Many of them hadn't been to confession themselves in years. They couldn't remember the form of absolution. They hadn't said Mass in years. They were living in open concubinage with women. I mean, on and on. That's what Sheen meant. Something was wrong. And that's just one example of many, you know?
And to understand how much, he began with a personal reform. Mm-hmm. He experienced a conversion mm-hmm. by making the spiritual exercises
yes, he did.
under
yes.
a Jesuit in Rome.
Absolutely right.
Before going on to Milan.
Mm-hmm.
And that personal conversion made him realize, I'm not a cardinal for a personal career and wealth and all that good stuff. Mm-hmm. He lived a very simple life.
Very austere, you bet. Mm-hmm.
And the priests who did not want to be as austere as he. At one point, I remember this one time he had a convocation for the priest. He was going to do benediction, and one of the priests shot him in the back as he's processing up to expose the Blessed Sacrament.
They didn't fool around in those days, did they?
No.
Boy, oh boy.
No. But he had good vestments.
So they blocked the bullet, in other words.
The buck, it was kind of a buckshot thing, and so that just splattered in there, and it saved
absolutely, them. Absolutely. But, I mean, in the 16th century, that was so terribly, terribly needed, and really did a remarkable job as much as the Jesuits did in the Counter-Reformation with the opening of universities all over Western Europe. The Catechism of the Council of Trent did. They were synonymous things when you think about it. Why did the Jesuits open these universities? To defend the faith, obviously. Mm-hmm. They were the great, great defenders of the faith in the 16th century. There's no question about that. So, if you take the story a little closer to home, and again, I'm amazed when you tell me you're old enough to have been instructed by this book. I mean, I thought you were much younger. But if we come in our own country, the bishops of the United States gathered in Baltimore for the Third Plenary Council in 1883. Cardinal Gibbons was the primate, if you will, the head of the premiercy, the first bishop of the first diocese established in the United States. And they gathered there. They gathered out at Roland Park at St. Mary's Seminary, and they gathered in the old Basilica of the Assumption downtown. And really, there were many, many pieces of legislation promulgated there in the Third Plenary Council. But one of them was, of course, the Baltimore Catechism. Now, the interesting thing for us was it wasn't so much then a period of doctrinal error or watering down of the faith, but it was the immigrant church we were dealing with. Poor people. People had to have the faith presented to them. And not only that, but by 1883 in the United States, we were really beginning to experience the growth, and the very significant growth, of the Catholic school system.
And the parochial school system had been very much a Protestant school
extremely.
system.
And to the extent that the Catholic children were forced to read the King James Version of the Bible and so forth, and which led the great Archbishop Hughes of New York to establish a whole political party to try to run his own political candidates to see if this couldn't be rectified, at least in New York. Mm-hmm. He didn't get too far, but he made the valiant attempt. But in any event, I mean, the church was just blossoming and growing. It was such an immigrant, such a tremendous influx of immigrants. At that time from Ireland and from Germany in the 19th century. Then as you get into the later 19th century, you had the Italian immigration, the Slavic immigration, and so forth, and Eastern Europe and all the rest of it. But, I mean, these children had to have a uniform way of memorizing the faith. So what you had from 1883 until sometime after the Second Vatican Council.
1968. That's a year I can remember that Baltimore Catechism was being rejected. I was teaching catechism.
In 1868, you were teaching catechism. No, you said 1860. Boy,
Did
didn't he say 1868, folks?
Oh, well, that was wrong, because that'd be going backwards. It was 1968.
No, absolutely.
Further proof that I'm older than you, because I can't remember the dates. But yeah, about 1968, Baltimore Catechism was
right out the door. So it's interesting, isn't it?
And attacked a lot of religious. Attacked.
Terribly.
They hated the Baltimore Catechism.
Terrible. And first of all, one of the very simplistic points that was raised in those days was that memorization was not the way to learn the faith.
Right.
Well, tell me the way to learn the faith. I mean, if you don't pound it in, well, you're not thinking about what you're memorizing. I'm not too sure that's a valid critique.
No.
All right, the younger the kids, sure. They're, I can remember well in grade school, boy, you were lined up against the wall, and the sister was there, and boy, you got the catechism question given to you, or several of them. And if you didn't know,
confirmation, which was about 5th grade or so.
Yeah, 5th grade.
The bishop would be there starting to ask questions.
Indeed, he would. Oh, sure, and you had to know them and know them thoroughly. No, it was a tremendously good grounding in the faith, and as the parochial school system in the United States was an even finer grounding in the faith, because, as you will remember certainly, the Catholic faith permeated the entire day from 8:30 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon.
Right.
It wasn't just the 45 minutes or whatever you studied catechism.
No.
Everything. It was the very air you breathed was Catholic in the Catholic schools.
You didn't eat lunch till you said grace and the Angelus.
And the Angelus, positively, sure. So it flowed over into everything, and it was... I've always said the Catholic school system in the United States was the envy of the Catholic world, really, in many ways. I can't think of another country where it was not any stronger. Some of them may have been as strong. But my point is, with all of this going on, that catechism which came to us from the Third Plenary Council was a standard, uniform way to learn the faith, and it was learned by generations upon generations of people. And I think people who had been raised with the Baltimore Catechism and raised in that era had really a difficulty, properly understood they had a difficulty, trying to comprehend younger generations in their own family, their children, their grandchildren, and so forth, who didn't have the remotest scintilla of a clue about some of the finer points of Catholic teaching that we did learn in the Baltimore Catechism. Right. So there was a terrible travesty after that was done. It was just, it was awful.
It was one of the
And you and I did indeed both live through it, so we know what we're talking about, believe me.
One of the things that I certainly recall is in the late 60s, the question or the issue you brought up. Well, how can you just memorize it without understanding and go? Well, the Baltimore Catechism was at different stages. Mm-hmm. So the first grade catechism was simple, but each year the questions were deepened so that you could, eventually accommodate more and more understanding as you grew. Mm-hmm. But then the other issue came, I think, as a critique from existentialist philosophy and psychology.
Absolutely,
where
it did.
You just have to have this experience, and you're not mature enough to make an act of faith or a decision.
Correct.
Sure. Well, sure, if you're Jean-Paul Sartre, but he couldn't make a decision either.
He couldn't make one.
His girlfriend.
In his best day, he couldn't.
Yeah, his girlfriend, he couldn't make up a mind about that. So, these people were using a false model.
That's right.
For decision-making, and they said, we'll just postpone learning the faith till adulthood.
That's right.
And just give a positive experience of being a community together until then. So you make collages, things like that.
Oh, gee.
And then later on,
Silly blurs of nothing.
Yeah, you'll make questions. But this was a period of great confusion.
It was. And what happened? You mentioned, Father, 1968. And you were doing work at the time. Now, that was right around the era, and I'm afraid to ask you this, but you weren't one of the authors of the Dutch Catechism, were you?
No.
You weren't a collaborator even, were you? You don't even speak Dutch.
I don't speak Dutch.
Well, the Dutch Catechism did immeasurable harm, as you know. And it really was a tremendous watering down of the faith. And I've often thought that what the Dutch Catechism introduced, what it ushered in at that period in the late 60s, really set the trend then for the next couple of decades. Because, not that it necessarily directly influenced this, but I mean, catechesis became so watered down, catechetical texts. Now, you couple that with, for example, parish CCD programs. Now, you have these youngsters for 1 hour on a Sunday morning. In fact, you don't even have them for an hour. It takes 10 minutes to settle them down, and 10 minutes beforehand they're ready to run out. So you might have them for 40 minutes or 45. And you're giving them this watered down nothing. Is what catechetics became. Right. It really did. You know. Remember some of those series that came out in those days? Without going into particulars, I mean, they were a disgrace. They really were.
Well, see, this is the context for understanding why Pope John Paul pushed Cardinal Schönborn to head up writing this new catechism of the Catholic Church.
Sure.
That's because of this confusion. They wrote this with Vatican II and the earlier councils in mind.
That's right.
Just the way Pope Pius V made sure that the Catechism of the Council of Trent had Trent in mind.
John Paul saw the need very clearly.
And he considered that plus the canon law code as his two great actions.
Absolutely correct.
And there certainly has been a change because bishops have been using the catechism as the measure for the other catechisms that they approve.
Oh, positively.
They won't approve of a
conformity with
catechism.
the CCC, fine.
Exactly. If it disagrees with that, you can't use it.
Absolutely right, yeah.
So that's been a very positive change. And then it's finally, EWTN's got you teaching it.
Well, that is not a positive change, but nonetheless, it's what EWTN is stuck with at the moment. That's all.
Yeah, so we're happy to have it.
Well, listen, it's a wonderful thing, and there've been other very splendid series on the networks dealing with the same thing too. But there was a need at this point, I think, to just introduce a new series.
Exactly.
So that's what we've been doing. Last year, I think I did about 25 programs. This year we have, 19 or 20 finished. A few more to go.
Good.
Remainder this week. We will cover the 4 parts, the 4 pillars, and you look at the sacramental life, you look at the liturgical life, you look at the moral life, you look at the life of prayer, the various pillars upon which the catechism is built. And there's an enormous amount of material. There are some very excellent study guides out there to help, of course, with that.
UCAT, many others.
Oh, sure. Oh, yes. So it's been a tremendous resource in our time. There's no question about it. It really has. And it's brought a lot of people back to a much deeper appreciation, I think, of the faith that has never left us, has always been there, but people were deprived of, really, through no fault of their own.
Exactly.
No fault.
Well, we're going to take a little break because we want to get some of your questions and your comments. And Father Connor and I will be here to respond to you and the folks here in the studio audience, so please stay with us. Thank you and welcome back. First of all, I would like to welcome you to come and join us if you can. Come on a pilgrimage, either by yourself or with your family or with a parish group. We just ask that you contact our pilgrimage department at 205-271-2966. Or you can go to the website, EWTN.com, and we'll be glad to be able to have you here in our audience. They'll give you information about the scheduling for masses as well, and tours of the studios, information about places to stay and eat. Also, if you want some information on planning a visit to the Shrine of the Most Blessed Sacrament in Hansville, which is where Mother and the sisters live, just go to their brand new website, which is www.olamshrine.com. olamshrine.com. And it's a very nice website, so glad to have you. Ready for some questions?
Absolutely.
All right.
By all means.
Start off with a phone call. Hello, Marianne.
Hi, Father Pacwa. How are you?
Fine. Thanks. Marianne from New York, right?
I'm Marianne from New York. How you doing?
There you go. And your question?
I just have two brief questions for Father Connor. My mom was raised in Ireland many years ago, and she can still answer anything that's in the Catechism, and she has always lamented that my brothers and I, who went through 12 years of Catholic school, were never fully exposed to the Catechism. It's a real sore point for her, and I was hoping that Father could elaborate a little bit as to why in the 60s, 70s, and 80s it seems that the Catholic schools completely not abandoned the study of Catechism. Was it a collaborative effort, or was it just on an individual school effort, or did people lose interest? And my other question is, I've never understood the term apologist. It sounds like people are saying they're apologizing for the faith. So I was just curious if you could give a little history as to where the term apologist came for the Church Fathers' teachings. And thank you so much. God bless you both. Thank you.
Sure. What is your name again?
Marianne.
Are you still there, Marianne?
No, I don't think so.
I wonder, I'd like to know what catechism her mother studied in Ireland. That would be a very interesting thing to know. Well, the catechism, of course, as Father and I were mentioning, really instructed people. We were talking specifically about the Baltimore Catechism, so we're kind of confining our discussion to this country to some degree. Sure. But it's certainly from the time of its promulgation in the 1880s and really right through to the late 1960s, so 80-some years, it was a very uniform thing of instruction. Now, many factors entered into this. You asked if it was a collaborative effort, and it really was. It was a collaborative downhill effort all the way. Because the collaboration was between a multifarious number of pseudo-intellectuals and self-appointed experts who didn't really sincerely did not think that, first of all, it was the right approach to catechesis. We were to get away from this idea that we were the one true faith. We were to get away from this idea that we had the fullness and totality of truth. We were to get along with everybody in the world. Everything was love, love, and more love. And love meant nothing except to water down the tenets of faith.
Now, are you against love?
That's a very ponderous question. No, of course not. But I'm against the ambiguous definition of it, which means it counts for nothing at all.
Yes.
Not at all, no. But so I mean, there was a whole theological effort to get away from catechesis as we traditionally understood it, just as there was a tremendous liturgical upheaval. I don't want to talk about liturgical renewal. I'd rather say a liturgical upheaval. The council wanted a liturgical renewal. The council called for the universal call to holiness. One of the ways to do it was to make Holy Mass more accessible, particularly in the vernacular that one spoke, etc., etc. There was a renewal of canon law. There was a renewal of in so many areas of the church. There was an opening of the church to the world. And yet there was a tremendous misunderstanding that went on in those days. So I would say that the watering down of the faith, as your mother would have learned it in Ireland to the extent that you probably learned it or were not exposed to it years later, was part of a very, very broad kind of a picture. And it was one element of a tremendous upheaval that occurred in the church following the Second Vatican Council. I'm trying to think of what the second part of Mary Ann's question was.
Well, let me just add something to that too.
She asked two parts. I know.
The sense of the upheaval in the liturgy and the rejection of a catechism and in that form with definite answers really went together.
Oh, yes.
Because
and you know what else went with it? The abandonment of religious life and the walking away from the vocations by the people who traditionally taught us the faith. Right. They weren't there to teach it.
Right.
That's another important factor.
And one of the things that I think was a big part of it, again, I trace back to the strong influence I saw of the existentialist psychologists. And the importance was expressing your authentic self.
Yeah.
Who
Sartre,
I really
Camus,
am.
who else?
Also Eric Erickson.
Oh, Erickson,
Fromm,
yes.
You know,
who's the other one?
Eric Fromm, Carl Rogers.
Yeah.
That these folks wanted to
all
talk
bad
about
the
the expression
yes.
of yourself. And so the liturgy was expressing how we feel.
That's right.
And you see that in many of the hymns.
Not the mystery.
That talk about us. You know, we are this, we are that, we're doing this, gather us here,
gather us in.
It's all us.
All are welcome.
And the idea that there's objective content to the faith was considered a challenge
by all
to
means.
That personal appropriation, saying, well, this is who I am.
That's right.
What about me?
Yeah.
What if I don't feel this
all
way?
Subjective.
And that was the battle that I think was going on. And by a certain tidal wave, the battle of how I feel, what's in me, won for a while.
Yes, it did.
But it, like a lot of waves, it thinned out.
Yes.
And
philosophically, you can trace it back to Descartes. You really can.
Sure.
No,
we don't want to go quite that far back. But
no, but he was one of the initial troublemakers.
I know it.
Yeah. What was Mary Ann's, the second part of her?
The second one is, what is apologetics?
Oh, that's right.
Are you really sorry for being a Catholic? Is that what it means?
No, it comes from the Latin root apologia. Apologia means defense. Apologetics is a defense of the faith.
And that's Greek.
Well, it's Latin. I mean, it came into the Latin.
They borrowed it.
They borrowed it from Greek. Oh, yeah. Okay. Very good. Next question.
Let's take a question.
Wonderful.
From
Here we go.
Audience. Sir, where are you from?
I'm from Kitchener, Ontario, Canada, near Toronto.
Oh, good to have you here.
Wonderful.
Welcome. And your question?
Well, one criticism I've heard about catechesis is that we catechize before we evangelize. We give kids and adults lots of information about the faith before they've made a commitment to Christ. Maybe can you distinguish between those two things and how they fit together and how we can evangelize?
Very excellent question. The evangelization is literally the going out into the fold, let us say, to spread the faith, to teach the faith. Now, what in heaven's name can you teach if you're not catechized first? If you don't know it yourself, you can't give it to anybody else, obviously. It's funny, one of the thoughts that's come into your mind immediately, the first thought that I had with that question takes me back a number of decades to London, to the Catholic Evidence Guild. Do you remember the Catholic Evidence Guild?
I don't remember them, but I heard of them.
Frank Sheed and Maisie Ward and all those remarkable people. They were catechized, and by catechized I mean they were instructed in church teaching at probably a higher theological level, but they were instructed for 2 full years before they were able to get up in Hyde Park or in the Central Park in New York when they moved to this country and major cities around the world. 2 full years of catechesis before they could get up and stand there and explain the faith and then answer people's questions. And they had tomatoes thrown at them and all kinds of verbal abuse.
Guys,
oh yeah, oh terrible. But in other words, the point is that they had to learn it themselves first before they could go out and evangelize. And that's why there is this. That's why we have the Catechism of the Catholic Church. We have to know it ourselves.
But see, there's also this sense that there's a need to evangelize our Catholic people and our young people You know, in
there's
the
no
earliest
question there is,
grades, and to, of course, even that evangelization, inviting them to love Jesus, inviting them to have faith in God.
Yeah.
You know, this is something that is
we then have to explain to them what this faith in God is,
and that's
who Christ is,
and that's his
what His
question.
church is.
And that's his question. At what point are we just catechizing without calling them to make a commitment to Christ?
See
that so that if you just evangelize without that commitment, then the catechizing is in a vacuum. But it's probably a back and forth. That there is an interrelationship that I certainly remember the sisters challenging us to make an act of faith in Jesus that they themselves lived very clearly and definitely.
Absolutely.
And when they challenged us not only to know the catechism, but to accept God in our lives, accept His authority, they did it out of, you could tell, it rang true from their own lives.
Oh, yeah.
And this is what each of us must do, that back and forth. This is the truth. Now, do you accept God? And do you accept His truth? Those are the kinds of double challenges.
So when you say back and forth, I mean, you're putting the evangelical challenge to them, but
forming their intellect as well.
Forming the intellect as well. That's the point, I think.
Yeah, and that both go together. It's not one or the other.
That's right.
But it's as we go through. This is why we do the renewal of baptismal vows every Easter.
That's right.
Each year we say again, do you believe in one God, the Father? Do you believe in Jesus Christ? Do you believe in the Holy Spirit and the Catholic
Church and so forth, yeah?
No, that challenge
there again,
is the evangelistic one.
People may be saying yes to the Easter Vigil and don't have a whole lot of knowledge of what they're saying yes to.
That's why
they have not been properly catechized.
I holler at them until they say
yes. Hear, hear. There you go.
Okay. We have Joe on the line. Hello, Joe.
Yes.
Hi, where are you from?
Delaware.
Great. And your question?
The question was on the reason why we put a big spin on abortion in the newspapers, in the Register, even the Catholic Register, and all. Why is it that people are afraid, or I don't know what the reason is? They don't want to say that abortion is the bottom line. It's murder. And if they put that in the people's minds, especially the promiscuous youth, if they knew that, hey, this is murder, it's a big thing, and you just don't fool around with this thing.
That's right.
So I'd just like to see what the two priests would have to say on that. Why is it that we put this spin around the word when it's murder? Well,
there's a couple of things. Two things that come to my mind immediately. The first would be that this question is not unrelated to catechesis, because many people have a very, very watered down notion of the whole abortion question, purely because of, and leads me into my second point, purely because of the culture in which they have been raised. They have been raised certainly in a culture that has accepted it since Roe v. Wade in the 1970s. So you have young people today growing up saying, well, what's all the big fuss about? If I want to be opposed to it, fine. If you want to be for it, just as fine. What's the deal, So there was such a cultural shift. And the cultural shift is not unrelated to, and it probably is commingled with, if you will, the crisis in catechetics. I don't know. I mean, how often does the average Catholic hear it in the pulpit?
No.
I don't know. They certainly don't hear about contraception. Yeah. They just don't hear about it. Now, abortion, I don't know, maybe once a year for the March for Life in Washington, you might get a little push for it. But, the clear explanation, the explanation has to become clearer and, I would dare say, even a bit firmer in today's world. In the 1950s, it'd be silly to be even talking about it. Remember a time when you couldn't even mention the word abortion on television?
Right.
They couldn't. They'd
You
hint at
couldn't
it.
say the word pregnancy.
You couldn't say the word pregnancy on television either.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the things that I guess to go to Joe's question.
Yeah, sure.
Is we need to make it very clear that abortion, and in the Catechism it is this way.
Oh, yeah.
That it's a sin under the category of sinning against the fifth commandment, thou shalt not murder. And I generally don't hold back. I don't use the word murdered as much as I do describe that what they are doing in an abortion is cutting off the arms and legs of this child and then crushing its skull.
Sure.
Now, this, I guess, I want to make sure that we don't mollycoddle this at all and let people know, because most murderers, do it more cleanly than most abortionists.
Oh, sure, sure.
The action of someone who shoots you, in an act of murder, is more clean than what goes on in an abortion.
That's very true.
And
isn't it? Boy.
this is something that that's one of the reasons why I was just giving a retreat this week and talking about this. How I oppose this idea of some politicians on the Republican side especially, who say, well, in the case of rape, it's okay to have an abortion. No, it's not.
Indeed, it isn't.
You would not do to the rapist what you do to the baby.
That's right. Very true.
And the baby's innocent.
Baby is innocent is right.
So if you don't do it to the perp, you don't do it to the innocent victim.
Right.
And I think this is the kind of stuff we have to make very, very clear. We have a question from our studio audience. Ma'am, where are you from?
I live in Michigan by way of Newfoundland, Canada.
Wow, I've been to both.
Great place to
I've been
hunt.
over to Newfoundland, St. John's. And what's your question?
I identify a bit with Marianne, one of your questioners on the phone, and that I studied the Irish Catechism, and man, we had to know everything. But my question is, do we still teach the Ten Commandments?
Well, the answer is an unequivocal yes, we certainly do. And take it from one who has just spent, in fact, I'm not even finished yet. I spent days explaining all the ramifications of every commandment as they are explained in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. I would say the current Catechism of the Catholic Church infleshes each one of the commandments, pages upon pages upon pages, the ramifications, the meanings, if we're doing anything today, we're teaching the Catechism, the Ten Commandments, in a far more expansive kind of a way than they were ever taught. But to give you the short answer, by all means, we're teaching them. Absolutely right.
The difficulty is a lot of schools did not.
Oh yeah.
When I taught at the university, I would require my students to write out the Ten Commandments. This is in college. Write out the Ten Commandments on a quiz, when we covered Book of Exodus. And very few got more than 2 or 3, and then a lot of wrong answers. And then I would make them do it again. I'd let them know ahead of time.
Sure.
You will
This
have
is
to write it
university
out.
level you're
yes.
talking. Wow.
On the midterm,
Well, and there's
I would
another-
make them write it out again, and then on the final, so maybe by the final they got 8 out of 10.
Yeah, there's another part to your question too, though. When I'm giving you this strong yes, and it really is a strong yes as far as the Catechism of the Catholic Church is concerned. But it would be interesting to know in the various catechetical books that are used in our schools now. And I'm really not able to give you a good answer on that one, if the children still have to memorize them or not.
I don't know.
I would hope and pray they do, but I don't know. I really don't know the answer to that.
Ma'am, where are you from?
I'm from Phillipsburg, New Jersey, from St. Mary's in Alpha.
And your question?
My question is about the current Catechism of the Catholic Church. What's the difference between that and the new UCAT for teenagers or for the youth? I guess, Father?
One is a takeoff from the other, I believe.
Yeah, the UCAT.
It was probably more geared to young people.
Yeah, the UCAT is a shortened form of the Catechism of the Catholic Church.
Father, is it the same format? Because I've not had contact with you.
Yeah, the same structure.
Same structure, is it? Okay.
But it's written for
young
adolescents.
Okay.
And quite frankly, a lot of adults like it quite well because it's something that they say, this is a good introduction for an uncatechized adult. To go to the UCAT and then graduate to the Catechism of the Catholic Church.
Oh, yeah.
It's a very good process for a lot of people to try that. You have another question here. Speaking of youth, young lady, where are you from?
I'm from San Antonio, Texas.
I love San Antonio, Texas.
Oh, the River Walk there in San Antonio. The Menger, you know the Menger Hotel? Beautiful place, right in downtown.
She probably lives
the
at
Alamo.
home.
Remember the Alamo? Davy Crockett's buried in there. Imagine if Davy Crockett ever knew he was buried in a Catholic church. Oh.
Anyway, your question.
Yeah. My question is, how many times has the Baltimore Catechism been revised?
Well, as we said, it began in 1883, and it was still going really till the late 60s, and you can still get copies of it today. So it's I dare say over 80, 90, 100 years or whatever, more than 100 years. It probably has been revised any number of times, but revised in the sense that we shouldn't even say revised, really, but gone into new printings.
Yeah, it wasn't revised.
Not in the sense that anything was taken out or added to. The original document promulgated, by the Third Plenary Council of Baltimore is still the Catechism in effect, to my knowledge.
The only thing was they did have it at different stages for every grade.
Oh yes, grade levels.
Yeah,
yes,
the different grade levels.
Yeah.
So that when in first
grade,
grade,
never used in high school, to my knowledge.
No.
Faith and Reason was one that we used.
Right.
And then when I was a senior in high school, new religion textbooks were put into the high school. Man Come of Age. Yeah, I wish you could have seen Man Come of Age.
Yeah, see, you're younger than I, so I missed that.
Oh, you are lucky.
We have another. You look reasonably like that other young lady. Are you related to her?
Yes, she's my sister.
I bet you're from San Antonio, too.
Yes.
How do we guess that about her?
See? And what is your question, sweetheart?
My question is, I know that the Catechism of the Catholic Church has been written, but why do some schools in the United States still use the Baltimore Catechism to teach their students?
Good question.
Yeah, it is. It is very good. I don't know how many would still use it, very honestly, but there would be some.
Growing number.
Is there a growing number of it?
Yeah. And one of the reasons is...
Probably the formatting more than anything else, I would think.
Huh? Because it is for each grade level.
Yeah, and it's memorizable. The Catechism of the Catholic Church, the structure of it is you and I would look at it if we picked the thing up to read it. It wouldn't be an easy thing to commit to memory, really.
No.
It's more of a source book, if you will. Marvelous source book.
But the question-answer format teaches better.
Oh, yes,
and that's why some schools are still using that. So thank you for your question. Also, there was somebody who asked a question. She was I saw the notes that she's a member of a woman's version of the Masonic Lodge, the Eastern Star and things like that. Yeah. And before becoming a Catholic, she wants to know, is it okay to stay in that, or should she get reject membership in Masonic organizations?
Well, they've always been strongly frowned on by the church.
Condemned, I think.
Certainly condemned in the older days.
That's a frown. That's not a smiley face. That's a frown.
That's a super frown in the old days. And there isn't much of a smiley face toward them today either.
No.
They're very, very, whatever else they are, they're very anti-Catholic, I think, in their orientation.
In their origins,
and their origins extremely so. Yes,
some less so. But from the very beginning in the 1700s, the lodge started in 1716, and by the 1730s,
very secretive in nature.
The Pope had rejected it.
So to answer the question, I would say by all means she should leave it. Wouldn't you? By all means,
100%,
leave it. Oh yeah,
100%.
Very definitely, yes.
And just be done with all that. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Father.
I want
it's
to let
wonderful.
people know that your books are available at Religious Catalog. You can call 1-800-854-6316, or go online to EWTNreligiouscatalog.com and get some good books in order to learn something. And if you would join me in giving a blessing.
Absolutely.
May Almighty God bless you and keep you and cause His face to shine upon you and lead you in all of your ways by His peace. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
And you know, we can have Father Connor not only on this show, but doing this ongoing series, plus all the other series he's done, because you make it possible. Your gifts and your ongoing support. So please keep us in between your gas bill, your electric bill, and your cable bill, and we'll pay all of our bills too. Thank you.